the importance of building closer cooperation between long-term investors and others, businesses and think tanks. The B20, the D20, the T20, they have been at the core of these efforts to find shared solutions, to find ways to boost private investments in infrastructure. So during this panel that is about to begin, we will discuss the main achievements on infrastructure during the 2021 Italian G20 presidency and how the G20 engagement groups have worked together to deliver their priorities to the G20. So without further ado, I would then ask the panelists to take the stage. Ms. Marcegaglia, who is B20 Chair and CEO of Marcegaglia Holding. Thank you and welcome. There, yes, thank you so much. And Dr. Ibrahim Almojel, co-president of the D20 LTIC, CEO of the Saudi Arabia Industrial Development Fund. Thank you for being with us. And Mr. Dario Scannapieco, our host, who has been recently appointed the CEO of Cassa, Depositi and Prestiti. Thank you so much for this day. We will also have Dr. Profumo, Francesco Profumo, who is chair of the T20 Infrastructure Task Force. He is chairman of Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo. He will be joining us virtually, but not immediately. We will join him later. So thank you very much. You all have microphones, I believe, yes? So let's begin our panel. We'll be doing brief sessions. We have a very, very rich agenda, so I hope we can get to everything. So, Ms. Marcegaglia, I would like to start with you. The B20 business community is deeply committed to global efforts to ensure a transition that can be beneficial to everyone, so both for the environmental and the global economy. And new sustainable infrastructure is crucial to the achievement of long-term growth, obviously. But the problem is that private investments in infrastructure have reached a minimum low in the last few years, which is really concerning. So what are the main obstacles that you consider the most important to be addressed in order to facilitate more private investment in infrastructure? And how could the cooperation with the public sector be improved to address these issues?
Okay, so thank you very much. First of all, let me thank CDP for the invitation. Let me say that I think on infrastructure investment, what I heard until now, it's very interesting, and I think that there is really a strong agreement among the public sector, the development banks, the long-term investment, and the private sector. So I think on a key issue like this, and of course with the government, on a key issue like this, the fact that we have worked together during this year, we have also a joint statement on that. We share ideas, we benchmark among our experience. I think is very important, and so I want to underline this. And also, let me also say that I totally agree, and this is also what we are trying to do in the B20. It's also very important that we not only make policy recommendation for this year 2021, but we really try to work with a long-term, let's say, approach, and so try to work a lot with Indonesia. We are also doing the same with the B20 Indonesia, because I think it's very important, and if we talk about infrastructure, the long-term approach is really very important. So, having said that, let me say that it is very clear, and has already been said by the other people that has spoke here, that infrastructure investment are very important, and we need an increase, a strong increase on infrastructure investment if we want a strong long-term recovery, if we want to have a better inclusiveness, because we understand that very clearly that the pandemic has really make much worse the situation of inclusion around the world, and also if we want to meet the Paris Agreement. So the infrastructure investment has to be increased. As our minister has said, the role of public investment is key, but it's also very clear that there is a gap between what we need in terms of new investment to fill this gap and what is on the table. So the role of private investment is really very key. There are a lot of data, 6.3 trillion a year of gap. So I mean, it's very clear that we need to fill the gap. I also want to underline that this infrastructure deficit and the fact that we have to ensure sustainability and quality of infrastructures is even more important now in what we are seeing with the climate change. We see a lot of rising sea levels, extreme weather events, increasing of global temperatures. So all these things can damaging, infrastructure, and so the need to work on infrastructure is even more important. As B20, we had 9 task forces, and one of the most important one is the task force on investment in infrastructure. This has been chaired by Carlo Messina, CEO of Intesa, and we had 130 members working strongly on that. So what are the main points and what are the main obstacles from our point of view and why the private investment are at the lowest level compared with last year? The first point is that we think that the limited participation of the private sector is also due to scarcity of attractive projects. We know that now there are a lot of projects when we talk about the circular economy, we talk about green transport, renewable power, and also we also see that private investment are working on this. But what we see, and this is coming from banks, insurers, pension fund, and asset manager, there is a raised significant concern over the limited availability of attractive infrastructure asset to invest in. So the first point is this: we have to work all together to have more and strong, good let's say availability of this kind of project. The second, which is we think also very important, obstacle is that there is a kind of absence of a definition of sustainable infrastructures as an asset class. It has already been said, but this is very clear. If you don't have a unique or at least global and coordinated knowledge way for investors to verify which assets are genuinely sustainable, it's very difficult to invest. So what we call, the idea to have a clear and coordinated global taxonomy, we think it's very important. This is important, all the different points when you talk about climate change, but it is very important also here. So of course, we recognize that there has been some improvement on this, but still a lot has to be done. So we really ask and the G20 on this can really work to have a global taxonomy that is defined, and this can really support infrastructure investment. The third point is that we also face limited cross-border investment in infrastructure. It has also been said before, it's important to invest at a national level, it's important to invest at a European level, but it's also very important to have cross-border investment structure. Also here, we don't see available solution among alternative infrastructure projects, and we think we should work better and all together to have more cross-border investment with more information, and also having plans that can be shared. We see that there are some good examples all over the world, but I think we should have more than that. And finally, we also think that to have more private investment on infrastructure, it's very important also to work on boost regeneration of urban and suburban areas. This is a key point for us. We think there is a lot to do. We know the data. Half of the global population is in the cities, and the cities account for 80% of the global GDP. In the next year, we will get to 70% of the world population working in the cities, and we think that we should have a lot of good projects for regeneration of urban and suburban areas. We think that it's very important if we want to talk about social inclusion, if we want to talk about environmental protection, and this is really very important. There are other points on private-public cooperation, but maybe we will have time to discuss in the second ring. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's extremely important, the role of private and how to really change things and how to get it, how to increase it. I see that actually Mr. Profumo has been able to connect with us. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Then I will take advantage of this opportunity that everything is working perfectly to ask you a question then. So, Mr. Profumo, the pandemic, the green transition, and the digital revolution. So there has been so much going on. The world of infrastructure has been very much challenged in the last few years. But quality infrastructure also represents a great booster to sustainable growth and to ensure the reduction of climate greenhouse gases and other goals that are essential to us. So my question is, as T20, how do you think infrastructure governance should be strengthened? How should environmental criteria be included in infrastructure investment decisions?
Thank you. Then, thank you for the interesting questions. You are absolutely right. The infrastructure sector has been challenged during the last few years, and it has been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. But it has also proved critical for the response to the crisis and will play an even more important role in the recovery phase. The $2 trillion infrastructure plan unveiled by the President Biden last April and the multi-million investment plan in infrastructure launched by EU are just two examples demonstrating the key role infrastructure investment will have as a catalyst for sustainable economy recovery. Yet, in order to ensure long-term benefits and appropriate use of resources to respect social and environmental standards, stimulus package must be well designed and managed. Such a deep and fast transition required a well-functioning infrastructure governance system. Governments need to operate with clear rules and regulations at both national and international levels, developing and maintaining a pipeline of suitable public investment projects, having efficient project selection and prioritization procedures in place, and good management during implementation are cornerstones of good infrastructure governance. Indeed, infrastructure may play the most critical part in driving a green recovery. The G20 countries produce nearly 80% of global CO2 emissions, of which 70% come from the energy, buildings and transport sectors. The Forum has a key role to accelerate the shift to low carbon and energy efficiency infrastructure and favor innovative net gain approaches against ecosystem degradation. In recent years, we are seeing a growing trend towards investors prioritizing sustainable assets. The best available evidence confirms that the ESG funds can outperform and achieve better results if compared to traditional funds. Yet, much remains to be done to reorient capital flows towards more sustainable investment options. The lack of common definition, the lack of quality data, potential cost consideration, and the heterogeneity of infrastructure are some of the obstacles hindering the wide adoption of these criteria. We need an holistic framework aligning objectives and definitions. In particular, a close dialogue and exchange among the main stakeholders, including governments, institutional investors, asset managers, banks, and contractors, is important to increase trust and ensure a better consideration.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Profumo. That's very interesting, and I was interested in this point of view. And now I would actually like to get back to some of the issues we were discussing before with the private investment and the Dr. Almojel, who acts as a bridge between public and private sectors. G20 development banks, for example, they're at the forefront of the global efforts to increase private investments in quality and sustainable infrastructure. So, as D20 LTIC co-president, how do you think it's possible to reconcile the increasing demand for infrastructure, but also the transition to a carbon neutral economy? Because there's always this tension between the two. And how is the financing of development financial institutions changing in order to foster the green transition? How do we handle this tension?
Thank you for the question. Allow me to start by thanking our host. It's such an insightful program and an awe-inspiring venue. So thank you for having us here. On the increasing demand for infrastructure, we see it more so as an opportunity. As we face a challenge to build new infrastructure, it's also a chance to build it right, to build it in a way that ensures sustainability and allows for a venue for innovative financing and innovative private-public partnerships. To do so, we need to align the financial system with the sustainable development. This is also in line with the T20 and the B20, and we really thank their participation and close collaboration. For the D20, we highlighted and called for many measures to allow for that. Allow me to highlight four of them. First, promote the standardization of green finance policies. As you mentioned, it's important to have the same taxonomy. Second, enhance the transparency of information by promoting disclosure standards for carbon and environmental impact. Third, support developing economies in the implementation of sustainability goals. And finally, foster new and innovative financing avenues and public-private partnership structures. Allow me to share an example to conclude from Saudi Arabia. As we work towards sustainability, we created many initiatives within the circular carbon economy, one of which was the creation of a company called Tershid, owned by the Public Investment Fund. Tershid has the goal of increasing the energy efficiency of all government buildings through retrofit and others. Instead of doing it directly, they helped create, and they were patient in helping create an ecosystem of private players that do that. What did that do? Beyond just increasing the efficiency of the public buildings, we created an ecosystem of private players and reduced the system cost for others to leverage that expertise. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's interesting, the example of how you can create an ecosystem that will perhaps foster new ideas. Mr. Scannapieco, the European Union has announced that it will become carbon neutral by 2050. And many G20 members, of course, have committed in a similar way. The next generation EU will represent a unique opportunity, as we all hope and know, to increase investments in the quality, sustainable infrastructure and reduce the infrastructure gap, with hopefully a catalyzer effect for private investments. So, as CEO of CDP and as well, obviously, as D20 LTIC member, how do you believe that, that long-term investment financial institutions can leverage on this plan to foster this economic recovery, which is so important? And is there a role for G20 initiatives within this as well?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is the first answer. We are in a situation in which the economy, as it was just mentioned, is bouncing back after probably the deepest crisis after World War II. But there is no time for complacency, no time to relax. I mean, because we know that, first of all, there is still volatility. We can see that, well, first of all, many countries have a huge public debt, and also inflation is giving some signals. So the answer, of course, to these two symptoms is to increase the growth. And it's very important to see that, for instance, at European level, unprecedented measures have been put in place. And in a certain way, this also marks a change in the attitude and in the role of the European Union. I mean, we have discussed for many, many years about, austerity, public finance, but now there are two major points which are at the attention of our policy leaders. One of them is competitiveness. I mean, Werner was mentioning that Europe, for instance, invests much less than other areas in digitalization, innovation, in educational infrastructure that will allow Europe to compete. And then there are the other infrastructure, social infrastructure, physical infrastructure, where in Europe we are seeing a problem of aging. Most of them were built after World War II, so some of them have ended their economic life, some of them were built with materials that now have essentially completed their economic life, and where the world was completely different. So there is a huge role that we can play together. And of course, investing in infrastructures both can act as a stabilizer of growth and of recovery. Both can help tackling the biggest challenge we all face in front of us, which is the climate change challenge. So we have seen an unprecedented amount of financing coming through the European Union. In particular, the Recovery and Resilience Facility provided for 672 billion euro to relaunch the European economy. On top of this, 37% of these funds will be devoted to climate-related infrastructure and 20% to digital transformation, which also implies, the construction of key infrastructure. I mean, but here, you need to put in a row all the elements. What is needed in order to use effectively this money? We need a solid pipeline of projects. We need to work together and to join forces with European institutions. We need a common approach to investment. We discussed this morning in the 5+1 setting, so the 5 largest European NPBIs and NDIB, the idea about trying to align as much as possible some lending policies. We should start probably saying some no's to some projects in order to push ahead and fight better with an aligned approach the climate change challenge. So at the same time, NPBIs should work together also, of course, on the taxonomy, but also to help the public administration and the promoters to prepare projects. And this is a major point, I mean, we are facing, for instance, also in Italy, but not only here, in many European countries. Frequently, what are missing are not the financial resources, are the skills, the capacity to prepare good projects, and therefore we need, to work throughout the entire value chain, preparation of project, support to the public administration in the implementation, and financing. And financing means, of course, that we should allocate the risks between the different actors, the public sector, national promotional institution, the EIB. We as our colleagues were mentioning here, we are patient investors, and our patience should be used to attract the private sector. Structural subordination, longer maturity may be a key to attract other private investors. And what is important is that our voice and our common approach is heard by the G20, and we are very happy that we've been invited to provide our opinion. Now, the challenges we are facing are not European challenges, they are global challenges. So this is why it's extremely important to expand the debate outside of the European Union, to understand, as we were debating today, that the pandemic may be solved in Europe, but if it is not solved around the world, it will remain a problem. So we need a global approach, and we need to join forces, exchange experiences, in order to tackle in an effective way a problem which is global. As a global problem is also the climate change. So the idea of cooperating together, sharing experience, finding a common understanding to what are the sustainable investment in infrastructure that we should support is a way to give, I think, a concrete signal that, as our French colleagues said today, we still are not aware what will be the result and what will be the solution, in 2050 to the climate change. But what we are aware as long-term investor is that we will be part of the solution, and we will give our support to that solution.
Thank you. You'll still be here, that's for certain. And I'm also, as a journalist, I'm always fascinated with the issue of how quick absorption of this money will take place, because there is indeed a problem of presentation of projects, etc. Let me come back to you, Dr. Almojel, if I may. Because at the end of this one-year process, the members of D20 LTIC have elaborated a statement which indicates the main shortcomings to be addressed to facilitate new investments in infrastructure, to enhance public-private cooperation, and de-risk investments for private actors. So, always within this realm, which are, in your opinion, the main findings and priorities that one should focus on? Because this is, as Scannapieco just said, Mr. Scannapieco, a global challenge.
Thank you again. And just despite the challenges we all faced last year, the G20 kept us very busy. We had a very busy year last year. Throughout the year, we had several activities focusing on infrastructure and sustainability, including a working group on social infrastructure and webinars on circular carbon economy, quality and sustainable infrastructure, and on the development of climate risk model. Noting how exciting those topics are and the Zoom fatigue, yet we were significantly oversubscribed to all of them, which underscores the importance of those topics and how much they own of the global dialogue right now. Acknowledging the challenges we face, the G20 decided to play its role as a credible and consistent stakeholder for the G20 on activities that concern infrastructure and long-term investment. And this year, for the first time, thanks to our colleagues in Cassa, we decided to collaborate with the G20 for a new G20 Investors Dialogue, in which we started an open dialogue with D20, G20, through the B20 and the T20, and with the private sector in general. We kicked off a series of these discussions back in June, and for the first time we contributed as one of the organizers with the G20 presidency. Today's conference is a continuation of that effort. Building on all the activities, our statement, and allow me to repeat some of what I said before just to underscore the importance, we recognize the following. We need to standardize the taxonomy on sustainable financing and increase transparency on information. We need to strengthen the focus on designing and maintaining sustainable infrastructure as part of a more comprehensive strategy to ensure a transition to a more sustainable economy and a more efficient energy consumption. We need to be comprehensive and inclusive to ensure the support of developing markets. Yesterday in our steering committee, we also underscored the importance of what you mentioned, where it is the development of the talent that will deliver all of this. And the importance of investing in that social infrastructure, not only in the buildings, but also in the curriculum that will allow the creation of that talent pool. Finally, to conclude, the D20 LTIC is committed to take a proactive role and build upon its established dialogue and cooperation with the main international bodies. This year, we adopted a new strategy which ensures a close alignment with leading institutions, specifically the G20, to focus on long-term and global challenges towards a sustainable economic growth for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, then that's perfect to our next step. Ms. Marcegaglia, I wanted to go back to some of the issues that you were mentioning as B20, because it's really interesting to get the view of the companies and businesses. And which are, in your opinion, the issues that require an immediate response by G20 governments to ensure this new era that we all hope will take place of public and private cooperation?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, as it has been said, it is very clear that we need to cooperate strongly at the global level among governments and also among, of course, business, governments, long-term investors. And as I said before, I'm very happy that we really share the recommendation, we really share the ideas on this point. For example, in the B20, I see that on other points like trade, or on, when you talk about, climate change, you see a lot of also different and conflict of interest. Here, I think the main ideas are shared, and this is also, it's a very important one. So I think that the public-private investment and cooperation is very important. As it has been said, and also I said before, the first point is to have good projects together. Also, as Dario said, we think we should work together and help and support the public administration, the public sector, to have good projects with also smart infrastructure, new technology. Werner said before, we need a lot of new technology, breakthrough technology, not only on climate, but I think also on infrastructure, on all the different aspects. And we need to work a lot also on skills, because skills are very key. So first of all, we need good projects, and we have to work together on this. Then we need also, good and interesting, let's say, tools to have better private and private investment going together. We think that we need dedicated, standardized, and market-ready financial tools, like, for example, creation of dedicated financial vehicles or co-investment platforms. There are also here, we don't have time to discuss too much on this, but there are good examples all over the world. We can share that. The second point is that I think we need also to mitigate the political risk embedded in infrastructure projects. This is a very important part when you talk about private investor and decision-making process. You need to, to mitigate the political risk when you have to decide. The third point is that as I said, okay, taxonomy is very clear. I also want to touch upon the fact that we need to also to intervene on a regulatory level. For example, when you talk about public and private partnership, this has been said by Giovanni Gorno-Tembini, this is an interesting instrument, but we should simplify this. Sometimes it's very difficult to understand what is needed, how to get there, so simplification is very important. We think also we need to have also a different reviewing regulatory accounting requirements, such as the International Financial Reporting Standard number 9, when you talk about, for example, banks, this is something that is discouraging long-term credit and long-term investment. So we really need also to work all together on this part, these regulatory treatments of infrastructure finance, really to attract more investment, private and public investment. And also we think also it is important also to create the condition for governments and multilateral developments to guarantee banks and insurance companies infrastructure investments. Sometimes supporting by guarantees could be a way to attract more investment. And finally, I want to reiterate this point about regeneration, urban and suburban investment. I think when you talk about quality of life, when you talk about climate change, this part is really very important, and we can have very important and significant investments at the urban and suburban level to really go on with the, fighting climate change, working on inclusiveness, and also here we have to share experience and to work together, public and private. So I think we all know that when you have global problems, we need a global solution, and we need really to work all together, because nobody can do it by himself, and private-public investments could really make the difference in this very important point. Thank you.
Thank you. And now from B20 to T20, Mr. Profumo, could you summarize the main steps of this year's efforts in chairing the T20 task force on infrastructure investments and financing? Important scholars have elaborated policy briefs illustrating the major trends of post-pandemic infrastructure and possible innovative ways of financing. So if you can help us understand the findings, and if you can share the most promising ones with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. In the last months, our task force on infrastructure investment and financing has engaged over a dozen interdisciplinary teams, including think tank, international financial institutions, research, and advocacy platforms. One of the main objectives of the task force was, in fact, to bring together the expertise of a network of researchers and policymakers from different parts of the world. Together, they work towards collecting the best research evidence and designing forward-looking policy solutions to overcome current challenges and make infrastructure more resilient, smart, green, and inclusive. In addition to collaborating and partnering in policy work, the task force has organized several events, including conferences and workshops, to stimulate discussion on some of the key priorities. Thanks to this exchange of ideas, we have identified a fourfold agenda on infrastructure, which focuses on data and technology, urbanization, social infrastructure, and smart cities, mobilizing capital and markets for sustainable infrastructure and resilient infrastructure. Around these key macro themes, several recommendations have been consolidated with the ultimate goal of translating research findings into actionable policy. Let me get to the point. What are the main policy recommendations? First, data and technology. we are convinced of the necessity to integrate digitalization and system modeling throughout the full life cycle of infrastructure to strengthen cross-border data management and improve data quality, to promote value chain integration through the use of federated digital platforms. Second, urbanization and smart cities. Through the policy recommendation of our working group, we encourage promoting a more systemic convergence between social innovation and economic infrastructure investments, with the goal to reduce inequality and improve inclusion. In particular, we needed to foster policy actions to promote higher biodiversity standards, to accelerate the transition toward decarbonization and circular economy, and to improve quality of life while mitigating the financial gap. Third, you mentioned innovative ways of funding. Mobilizing capital and markets for clean and sustainable infrastructure in both developing and developing countries will be crucial in the post-pandemic era. In order to bridge the infrastructure gap, tools such as blended finance, transition finance, and green bonds can play an important role in involving private capital in the construction and modernization of sustainable and resilient infrastructures. But it is also necessary to find effective means for risk allocation and risk sharing between the public and private sector. The last, but not the least important point in our agenda is resilience. Infrastructure should be planned in such a way that it can not only endure, but also respond and recover quickly from natural hazard and changing climate conditions. Promoting standardized ratings to incorporate maintenance and resilience principles in infrastructure projects, combined with the development of technical assistance to ensure maintenance expertise and capacity building, represent necessary steps for building high-quality infrastructure. Finally, I'm convinced that the G20 is the most appropriate forum for taking on these pressing challenges and to strengthening the sustainability of infrastructure investments at the scale and speed needed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing these findings with us, and I'm so happy that we were able to do this session and put together all the different input from each field. So, Mr. Scannapieco, in conclusion of this panel, what would you like to highlight at the end of this open chat, and what kind of concrete actions do you think are the most pressing for the G20, getting back to our core issue, and what forms of international cooperation could be established to reduce the investment gap?
Well, it is frequently said that the first step you need to make in order to solve a problem is to acknowledge that there is a problem. And the takeaway I have from the discussion we had yesterday and today is that there is a very common understanding of the problem throughout all of us. And there is also what I consider a positive attitude toward this problem. We want all to be actor of a positive change. And therefore, both the B20, the T20, the D20 long-term investor club, we all understand the implication of the problem, and we also share the fact that we cannot act independently. We need to join forces, share experiences, develop common approaches, and we should also press the G20 because we know that we have no longer a lot of time to solve this problem. So the three groups, the B20, T20 and D20, share a number of beliefs on infrastructure which are crucial to jumpstart the investment in the infrastructure field now, which are so needed. So first of all, G20 countries should start to elaborate long-term infrastructure investment plans. And this also to allow the private sector, which Emma rightly said is crucial to tackle this challenge, to have a clear overview of needed global investment. I would like to stress one point that Ibrahim made. When we mention infrastructure, education is a key infrastructure. We need new skills, we need more educated people to be able to develop that innovation that we need also to tackle the climate change challenge. It's also crucial to establish a level playing field for infrastructure investment worldwide to ensure accountability and accelerate the achievement of environmental and social goals. Third, G20 members should design investment-ready mature project pipelines to facilitate the participation of the private and institutional investors. Again, here we need to join forces, knowing that each one of us has a different role to play. I was mentioning before, the public sector has a role to play in terms of financing, patient investors has another role, and commercial banks have another role. So they are all needed to share equally the risks, to share, in different ways, the risks when financing infrastructures. And what we need is a permanent dialogue to which I think we have contributed a lot during these days. Among all the parties involved, all the stakeholders comprising institutional investors, national and multilateral development banks, general contractors, the private sector, asset manager, we all should open a dialogue because we all have a common understanding of the problem and also we have a common view of how to solve this problem. So after these 2 days, if I can launch a message, I'm very positive because again, we have a common view of the problem and of the solution which is needed. And of course, there is a lot of willingness to help our policymaker in dealing with this huge epochal challenge.
Thank you so much. I think it is indeed a unique opportunity. There's never been, as you said, so much put into this sector by governments, by everyone. Everyone is counting on it. So that concludes our first panel. So thank you so much to Mr. Scannapieco, obviously, Dr. Almojel, Marcegaglia, and Mr. Profumo, remotely connected. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now, for the second part, I would like to hand over to Jason Liu, Head of Global Infrastructure Facility, who, as moderator for the day's second panel, will present to you the very distinguished